This aircraft was meant to be the showcase of the modern German technology during its development, and replaced the Bf-110 heavy fighter. But in the end had so many problems that after only a few hundred units built, it was replaced with an improved version. Today we will look into the history of the Messerschmitt Me 210. The story of this aircraft starts in 1934, when the RLM started looking for a new design, which could be used in many different roles, as a long-range escort fighter, heavy fighter, or bomber. This was the original Kampfzerstörer project. 3 companies got into the final rounds of this tender: Messerschmitt with their Bf-110 design, Henschel with the HS-124, and Focke-Wulf with the FW-57 model. But less than a year later, the specifications were changed, and the 2 roles were separated, to the Zerstörer, destroyer or heavy fighter, and the Schnellbomber or fast bomber roles. The Bf-110 won the competition for the heavy fighter design, as it was much smaller and more nimble than its rivals, thanks to the design choice of carrying the payload externally. A modified version of the plane, the Bf-162, was entered for the Schnellbomber role as well, but it lost out to the Junkers Ju-88. Nonetheless, it was accepted for the heavy fighter role, and the first pre-production Bf-110 was delivered in January 1937. The Luftwaffe had high hopes for the type, but the heavy fighter soon started to show its shortcomings. During the first campaigns of World War II, it proved itself a capable ground attack aircraft, but its range was too short and it lacked maneuverability, which during the Battle of Britain became a problem facing the agile British fighters. If you're interested in the detailed history of the Bf-110, I have already made a video on that type, so check it out. But even before the production variants of the Bf-110 were finished, Messerschmitt already worked on the planned successor, which was hoped to surpass the heavy fighter in every aspect, or so it was planned. And this design was the Me 210. Let's take a minute to explain why the Bf-110 had the Bf prefix, and the following Me 210 became Me, as the naming caused much confusion during and since World War II. The company, which was later known as Messerschmitt AG, started its life in 1916 as BFW, Bayerische Flugzeugwerke. Willy Messerschmitt joined the company in 1927 as chief designer, and though BFW went through a hard time in the early 1930s, when Messerschmitt designed the very successful Bf-109, they returned to the spotlight, and he became the favorite of the Nazi Party. Soon in 1938, BFW was reconstructed as Messerschmitt AG, with Willy Messerschmitt as chairman. From then on, the designs used the Me prefix, instead of the Bf one. Now after this little detour, back to the history of the aircraft. As the Bf-110 started entering service, the RLM already set out new specifications for its future replacement in late 1938. For the new specifications, Messerschmitt entered the new Me 210 design, while its competitors were the AR-240 from Arado and the less known AGO AO-225. The AO-225 was a very ambitious design, planned to use just one engine in the fuselage, driving 2 propellers on the wings through a system of drive shafts. It proved to be too complicated, so it was dropped early. This was the last design of the AGO company, which was then taken over by Junkers. The Arado design, though it was seen as a good candidate, was given low priority, but still prototypes were ordered for evaluation in May 1939. It was a quite ambitious design, with remote-controlled defensive guns and a fully pressurized cockpit. Only 15 units were built from this type, and the project was eventually cancelled due to various problems, but the finished planes were used in different roles during the war. The Air Ministry trusted the Messerschmitt design the most, as it was in sense a development of the earlier Bf-110, even sharing some of the parts. On the other hand, it introduced some quite radical changes compared to the earlier heavy fighter. Its nose was shortened and the cockpit moved back on the fuselage. While the Bf-110 carried its payload externally, the Me 210 received an internal bomb bay under the nose. And similarly to the Arado design, it featured remote-controlled defensive guns on both sides of the aircraft. These remote-controlled guns were seen as marvels of modern technology, giving a wide arc of fire, fired electrically, and using contact breakers to prevent damaging the tail. But as it turned out, in reality the aiming of the guns was very hard. They had constant problems with the remote control, and the guns themselves often jammed in the tight space. Also notice the original Me-210 design carried over the twin tail from its predecessor. On paper, the new Me-210 design had very good performance, as its speed was comparable to lighter single-engine fighters. So high was the confidence that the Messerschmitt design will be successful that the RLM placed an order for 1,000 aircraft, even before the first flight of the type. Which, as later turned out, was a mistake. The first prototype made its maiden flight in September 1939, about a year after the specifications were announced, and immediately problems were found with the plane, as it lacked stability both vertically and horizontally, and it had a tendency to stall in tight turns. The first attempted fix was to modify the tail. On the V2 variant, the twin tail was dropped, and a traditional single fin tail was designed. This was the first variant that featured the defensive armament, though at that time just as a mock-up. The test flights continued with the V2 model, but despite the new tail, the stability issues remained, and resulted in the crash of the plane in September 1940. Though the problems with the stability of the aircraft persisted, the RLM was too invested in the project, and desperate to push the new aircraft in production. So the first pre-production units were finished by mid-1940 and delivered to the first squadrons for testing. To try to work out the problems on the aircraft, later more than 20 production units were also sent to help the testing, but without any success. It was clear the aircraft needs a major redesign. The engineers trying to find a solution to the instability tried several different modifications. Amongst them was to increase the length of the fuselage by some 90 cm to a full length of 12.27 meters, which finally seemed to help with the stability of the aircraft. The already delivered planes still suffered many accidents though, and the constant interruptions to the production to implement different modifications resulted in very low numbers built. In 1941, only 94 of these aircraft were delivered, and finally in April 1942, the order was given to stop the production until a permanent solution is found to fix the design, and instead restart the BF-110 production with the G model, using Daimler DB605 engines. Though the type was soon replaced by the upgraded Me-410 variant, which incorporated all the fixes and more, the Me-210 didn't actually reach the end of its production yet. The C variant, which featured the new modifications on the airframe and used the stronger DB605 engines, was deemed satisfactory by the Hungarian authorities, and they purchased a license to build the type themselves. The tools were supplied by Messerschmitt to the Hungarians, and the first license-built Me-210C A1 variants rolled out from the factory in early 1943. They used the longer fuselage and the new leading-edge slats on the wings. The engines used were also Hungarian-made license-built Daimler DB605s. By the agreement, 1/3 of the production was used by the Hungarian Air Force, and 2/3 were diverted to the Luftwaffe. The production in Hungary ended in mid-1944, but by that time additional 267 aircraft were finished. The Me-210A1 was the heavy fighter variant, featuring two 20mm cannons and two 7.92mm machine guns. It used the 1350 horsepower DB601E engines. The A2 was a fighter bomber variant, with similar armament as the A1, but it could carry 2000 kg of bombs internally and under the wings. One of the A2 models was delivered to Japan on a U-boat, where it was assembled and evaluated. The B1 variant was a photoreconnaissance version, but only 4 units were built. The C1 and C2 variants had similar rows as the A1 and A2, but used the more powerful Daimler DB605 engines, producing 1475 horsepower each, and featured the improved airframe and new slats on the wings. The Hungarian license-built planes received the Me-210C A1 designation. This Hungarian variant had a planned bomber-destroyer version, using a 40mm Bofors cannon in the bomb bay, and rocket launchers under the wings. Only 3 of them were modified like this before the manufacturing plant was bombed. Interesting fact that they were working on a proximity fused air-to-air rocket as well, but it wasn't finished before the fall of the country. The Me-210 was 12.37 meters long, with a wingspan of 16.3 meters. It had an empty weight of 7,070 kilograms and a maximum takeoff weight of 9,705 kilograms. The plane used 2 Daimler DB605 engines producing 1,475 horsepower each. With these engines it could reach a top speed of 580 km an hour, a range of around 1,200 km, and it had a service ceiling of 8,900 meters. The plane's armament consisted of 2 20mm cannons and 2 7.92mm machine guns in the nose, plus additional 2 30mm machine guns in the side blisters, and it could carry 1,000 kilograms of bombs. The first production models of the Me-210 started to arrive to the units in April 1942, and the rush development and unsolved problems immediately showed. The instability of the plane made it a very bad gun platform, and none of the pilots liked to fly it. When the Me-210s met the British RAF fighters over England in September, it quickly became clear that they stand no chance against the more nimble single-engine planes. They operated over the Mediterranean, flying from Sicily, and in North Africa as well, where they flew successful ground attack missions, but also suffered losses from the Allied fighters. Most units using them were soon equipped with Junkers Ju-88s, and later with the newer Me-410 models instead. Only around 90 of these planes were delivered to the units, and the partially finished airframes were put into storage when the Air Ministry instructed Messerschmitt to cancel the production until they can fix the problems. When the solution to the instability was found, with implementing the longer reworked fuselage and the new leading-edge slats on the wings, most of the already built Me-210A models were retrofitted as well. The later CA-1 models, manufactured at Hungary, had better flight characteristics with the longer fuselage, reworked wings, and the DB605 engines, and they added a few hundred to the total number of planes manufactured. These were mostly used on the Eastern Front, and the Hungarian pilots actually liked them, though they were never considered an easy-to-fly aircraft. But the reputation of the Me-210 was already very bad, and only around 350 units entered service altogether. The type had a very short and rather shameful service record, and it damaged the reputation of the Messerschmitt company, and as a result, Willy Messerschmitt was forced to resign from the chairman position. The upgraded Me-410 variant was a more successful aircraft, but we will look at that plane in a separate video. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.